Ladies and gentlemen, come gather round, come gather round, come gather around. Previously, we went up north on a road trip to pick up a vehicle and suffered some cooling system misadventure. We got back, we repaired the cooling system leak, which caused the issue, which is kind of like fixing the gate after all the cows have left. Damage is done. Today we're fixing it. Let's go.
All right, so for the past week, we kept an eye on the coolant, and lo and behold, this engine is still pushing coolant out of the radiator, into the overflow, out of the overflow, and all over the ground. So that, to me, says head gasket. We did fix the leak, hooray, but now we're going to get into it. Head gaskets will usually blow, between the longest passage between the head bolts. So like if you have a Chevy V8, with 5 head bolts around the cylinder, it's likely going to blow between the longest distance between head bolts. The bolts hold it down, but when they heat up, the heads expand, and the stuff in between the head bolts is what moves, warps, blows the head gasket, and then never recovers. In this case, we're going to do more than just a head gasket. I disconnected the exhaust down below. You don't always have to do that, but in this case I did, because I'm going to be pulling the pan off of this and taking the pistons out. Reason being, when this thing disastrously overheats, it usually is going to take the tension out of the piston rings. And the piston rings are important for sealing well against the cylinder. They are springy. They're a steel or a cast iron, and they should have some springy tension pushing fairly hard against the cylinders. But as you overheat them, they lose that springiness. They lose that tension, and then they don't seal against the cylinder walls very well. So since this thing has been royally overheated, chances are they're shot, so I'm going to change them. If the rings don't have good sealing, you're not going to create good vacuum, which isn't going to make you any good power or good fuel economy. You're not going to have good compression, so that's not going to help you. You're not going to deal with the combustion very well. So a lot of stuff will go past the rings. They call it blow-by, which comes out through the oil fill cap as disastrous smoke. It's just everything goes bad if the rings are shot. So we're going for it. When I'm pulling ahead, I like to try to remove as little as possible. So I disconnect the exhaust manifold and pull it out of the way. I'm going to disconnect the intake manifold and push it out of the way, disconnecting as little as I possibly can get away with. And this is actually relatively friendly. Now, it's my kid's car, but I'm doing a fair bit of the grunt here because we're in a hurry. We started Friday night. This thing needs to be back together and running by Monday so my kid can get back to work. So here we are. And so you'll see me doing a lot more of the work because I am booking it. Yeah, this is sped up. I don't actually work this fast. But we start at 4:30 Friday. By 8:30, with a stop for supper, we had the cylinder head off and the pistons out. And then we had it running by the Saturday. And then we went in to seat the rings in on Sunday. And it's been good since. So intake manifold bolts are really annoying to get at from underneath. Even harder to put back in, just so you know. And you can't really see, and When I did a cylinder head with my wife's car, I did not undo the downpipe and exhaust. I just pulled the exhaust manifold out of the way because I wasn't going to pull the pan off or drop the pistons out of it. In this case, we are. Handy having a lift, let me tell you. Oh my gosh. You should get a lift. Your old man knees are going to be happier if you have a lift. Oh man, feeling the trauma coming on looking at this already. So exhaust manifold out. Here come the head bolts. These are not torque to yield, so you can reuse those head bolts. Although apparently in industry, people reuse them anyways. We did inspect the head gasket to see if there was any death on it, and there was a couple spots that looked a little cooked. The sketchy part with this is the engine block surface. The deck of the block may succumb to a little bit of warping as well. But we're not in a position where we can take this apart and get the block machined. Using a Mighty Vac to suck out the last of the coolant in the open block head. And then we're going to start pulling pistons. That is partly done. underneath. Honda has this ingenious main bearing cradle that all the main bearings are held together in one juicy piece, which is nice and annoying. Makes it rigid, makes it strong, but it's actually really kind of annoying to deal with the connecting rod bolts. Blah. The oil pickup makes a funny face. I should have taken a picture of it. It looked really cool. So we took the whole cradle out because I tried to get all the rods off and just forget it. So we'll just zippity-doo-dah, take the cradle off. Got a lot of oil on myself. The connecting rods are also not numbered. Interesting fun fact. The bearings should be a kind of a stuck press fit in the cradle. In this engine, the middle one fell right out. It was no longer dimensionally correct. I was not expecting that. So look at this. This is the bearing that fell out. It wasn't even the right outside diameter. Ew. And when you see copper, that bearing's a goner. So, ugh. Luckily, my auto parts store in town had a replacement set of main bearings. And the only auto parts store in that chain in Western Canada that had main bearings. So I bought main bearings for it as well. I have an old set of spark plug boots that I use for connecting rod thread protection. But in the end, it was awkward. So I just used a deep, probably a 7/16 socket on an extension to shield the crankshaft from the connecting rod bolts and slide them up the top like that. Anyways, got the head off, busted all apart, and have a look at what have we got ourselves into here. The pistons and the cylinder head here all show a significant amount of neglect from the previous owners. I know things like 20 years old, almost ready for collector plates. But, if you just change the oil frequently, your engine can last a long time. And lots of oil changes is a whole lot cheaper than rebuilding your engine. Everything in this engine screamed neglect. But we're quickly trying to put her all together. Had a bit of trouble getting the valve seals off until I figured out a way of prying it with a big long screwdriver. And then they came off pretty nicely. I kind of leveraged against the valve guide next to it. These cylinder head stands are pretty handy. I think it's just 3-inch channel iron with probably some 3/4 inch solid round that I machined at a taper. Pressure washing it nice and clean. Oven cleaner is one of my favorites, but I'll spray oven cleaner for 20 seconds, then pressure wash it off. But we're kind of in a hurry, so I'm just getting the loose junk off. And we're in here. It'd be a shame to not mildly port the cylinder heads. It'd be rude not to. So just a very mild porting to make sure it's smooth passages heading into the cylinder. The magic in porting is just before and just after the valve seat itself. So I just gave it a little bit of love. And then I don't have any cutters to do an actual valve job, but the valve seats and faces all look pretty good. So we've got some lapping compound, and we lapped all the valves in just nice. Old school away, making it seal just a little bit better. It'll work. And then flush the mother-loving snot out of it, because lapping compound is basically sandpaper in a tub, and you do not want that lying around in your motor. Honing with the Dingleberry ball hone to get the cylinders good. I honed it, got a nice 30 degree off a horizontal crosshatch like I like to do, and I flushed the mother-loving snot out of it with lacquer thinner and WD-40 to try and get as little honing grit in the crankshaft as I possibly could. This is a vertical reenactment. And then I used 400 grit on a very rigid sanding block just to try and make sure the deck is smooth. I did use a wee, 5/32, some kind of really small drill with a pin vise to clean out the carbon, or not the carbon, the oil drain back holes in the pistons to make sure they drain back. I took a ring and broke it and used the clean end of a broken ring to scrape all the carbon out of the grooves. Cleaned them thoroughly, and then new rod bearings, new rings, and I dunk them in a bucket of oil. A little bit on the bearing, clamp it, my little spark plug booties, and then install them in the cylinder. And then nut them from underneath. Again, it's nice to have a hoist. You should get one. Tops of the pistons were cleaned with a wire wheel. You can do the tops. Don't ever touch the sides of your pistons with the wire wheel. You'll take off metal, and you do not want that. These rods were not numbered from the factory. In a convenience way, I just used my automatic center punch to put like 3 center punch marks on cylinder 3 and 2 center punch marks on cylinder 2. Do one side of the rod and the cap the same side so you can put them back together the same way. And they are torqued. I zipped them up with a speed handle and then torqued them. And then the main bearings get put into the cradle. Oh, handy tip for getting bearings out of the block when the crank is still in the engine. Most of these I could peel out relatively well. The rear main was a little tougher to do. If you get the right thickness of a cotter pin and then hammer the round end of the cotter pin so it looks like a T, you can put the legs of the cotter pin into the oil hole in the crankshaft, and the T end, as you rotate the crank, will just peel out the bearing out of its location inside the block, and then you can do the same to peel in the new bearing. It works really quite slick. All the other bearings came out nice, but the rear one took a little bit more work. So tap it all in, that gets torqued, and then we're pretty much done putting the bottom back together. A smart cookie, not me, would have ordered a new oil pan gasket, but I have a big tube of black silicone Permatex, so I gambled on that. New valve seals. Don't forget the washers or the shims that go underneath the springs, or your valve springs will machine their way through the aluminum. So all those got put on. Not shown. I called up a machine shop, the only machine shop that was open in town, and there was only one guy working. So I phoned and said, is it possible to get a head milled today? And he's like, yeah, Monday would be better, but you could bring it in and we can see. Well, I don't want to see, I want to know. So I rushed out there, showed him the cylinder head and said, is there a case of your favorite beer that might help grease the machine to move a little better? Turns out the guy doesn't drink. So, but that's okay. Cash works as well. Wow, cylinder heads have gone up in price to get them remilled, but it could also be the expediency tax where you need it now, you can pay for it. Nevertheless, they milled it, and we can put it all back together. Oh, and this is when the camshaft slipped through my fingers, hit the ground, and broke into 3 pieces. Luckily, I have the original engine from this car still, so we went and got the camshaft out of that engine. We sprayed the new multi-layered head gasket, MLS head gasket, with 2 coats of Permatex copper head gasket spray, which is an extra little bit of goop to try and make sure it seals on whatever irregularity may still be on the block. It's good for the sloppy mechanics guys and used head gaskets. It'll probably work for us. And then we frantically try to put everything back together. Exhaust manifolds, little coolant thing. This engine came out of a manual transmission car and had an EGR. The engine that came out of this car did not have EGR, so that crazy round black with a silver ring that you see just to the right of the valve cover, that's the EGR valve. But there was nothing to connect it to in this chassis. So I still don't have EGR, but the valve is there. Just doesn't work anymore. Anyways, putting it all together. The smart cookies of you will notice I forgot to put the cam cover on first, so I'm not going to show you me taking it all apart again to get the stupid cover back on. But why do something once when you could do it like 3 times? You just get better at it each time, I'm sure. Intake manifold goes on, and I think I saved the 3 bolts on the underside. And then something fell, like the hood. Don't do it. Oh, it's over. We fixed it. Note to Honda, any hood prop that's not straight is a fault waiting to happen. But it has to be bent to clear everything. It's kind of dumb. Anyways, we got it all back together. And by now it was about 8:30 or 9 o'clock on Saturday. We started sometime around 10:30. We had it back together by 8:30 at night. And then I think we're now arguing with those disastrously useless bolts on the bottom of the intake manifold. However, we got them in. Fresh oil filter, fresh oil. Timing belt, check the timing marks, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to run this for about 20 minutes and then change the oil. And with fresh oil, we're going to go and take it for a drive. And I break in the rings by going full freaking throttle all the way up to the red line and then full deceleration hard, always in a low gear. And then back up to the red line, back down to idle. Back up to the red line, back down to the idle. And it's full throttle like you mean it, driving. What you're seeing here is the first 20 minutes. The next day, we took this out and drove the can off of it full throttle and down to seat those rings on acceleration and deceleration. You do that, your rings will seal and you won't have oil consumption issues.
All right, so let's go back together. We're running it for about 20 minutes just to make sure everything's doing okay. Seems to not be filling up the radiator, burning off some of the smoke and oil. New rings, new head gasket, mildly ported head. New rods, new mains, and pretty soon we'll be doing an oil change and then taking out to seat the rings. All right, there we are.
So it's always nice to have somebody around while you're running it. I had my son just running it for 20 minutes, keeping it about 2,000 RPM. Probably don't have to on an engine like this, but I do. It's not going to hurt it. And we check for leaks and make sure there's nothing going wrong, and then we just change that fresh oil right out of the engine. When you do that first oil change, don't look at it. It's usually got a lot of sparkly goodness in there. Just don't look at it. If the next one is pretty bad, then we can maybe worry about it. But even then, what are you going to do? Just ignore it. While it was running, we had a flashing green dot on the Prindle in the gauge cluster. And I think that's odd. And a check engine light popped up as well. So we checked codes, and it says it was not happy with the transmission torque converter clutch solenoid, which is under the hose EGR collection thing at the side of the cylinder head, and I broke that. So we ended up going to Pick and Pull to get another one because it's actually pretty expensive.
Not all these jugs, but fresh coolant again, and we ran the engine 20 minutes, changed the oil, we seated the rings for 30 minutes, changed the oil. We're going to put it back in here and change the oil yet again because I want to make sure that everything is gorgeous inside there. So far, it's been a week now. It's running good. It sounds great. It's quieter, which is surprising. Might even get better fuel economy because it might actually have some decent vacuum. But it's got some, it's a little bit more powerful, less noises. It's definitely a happier machine. So we will get back to you if anything goes south on this thing. But for now, this thing is a win. We got it done. Head gasket, new rings, new bearings, and this thing's ready to go. So as always, thanks for watching, take care, and we will see you again.